Okay guys, look, I'm trying to do something in this video that perhaps isn't going to be very easy and probably won't be successful either. But if you don't set your targets high, you're never going to reach for the stars or something. I think I've mixed my metaphors a little bit there, but you know what I'm saying. What I want to do is to put to bed once and for all this crashingly poor argument that rocks are in some sense atheists. And I have a confession to make before I go any further with that, which is that some of the things I'm going to say in this video will contradict some things I said in a video called something like All Babies Atheists in July of last year, July 2011. My position has altered. I was as crashingly unfounded in what I was saying, in part there, not so much with regard to babies, although my position has altered on that as well, but particularly with regard to rocks, as anybody else is. So what I want to do first is just to present another example. I'm assuming everybody has a reasonable grasp of what's in the New Testament, so that you will know that in the book of Acts, the Apostle Paul, the book of Acts is called the Acts of the Apostles, and yet for some reason it only seems to deal with Paul, which always seems, I don't know why it's not just called the Acts of Paul, really. But anyway, that's kind of an aside that I've lost my thread a little bit there. In the book of Acts, we hear that Paul goes out and preaches. And he preaches to the Jews, and he preaches to the Gentiles, and then he goes somewhere, and then generally the Jews reject him and the Gentiles accept him. And then he preaches somewhere else, and he preaches to the Jews, and he preaches to the Gentiles. Now what I want to do is to ask you what kind of image you have in your head when I say that. Do you have the image that Paul is preaching to a group of Jewish people, and then when he's unsuccessful there, he goes and preaches to a group of rocks? And the rocks accept what he has to say, and then he moves on somewhere else and he preaches to a group of Jewish people, and then he preaches to another group of rocks. I think you don't. And the reason I don't think you're getting that mental image is because we understand what a Jew is, and we understand that when we're using the term Gentile in this circumstance to mean a non-Jew, we don't mean literally anything that isn't a Jew. It is literally true that a rock is not a Jew, but we understand that when we use the term Gentile, we are referring to a person who is not a Jew. So to start dragging rocks into the affair is really to try and drag things in that are totally outside of the definition of the term that we are talking about. Let me give you an example of what I mean here to try and emphasise my point by playing you to a clip of a guy that made a video the other day who you may or may not be familiar with. He is the YouTuber Integral Math. I want him to say what he has to say, and then I'm going to make some comments.
Theists from time to time get butthurt, and they'll mention to me this argument. And I think they're right to be a little bit butthurt, because it's very disingenuous on people like BionicDance's part to make this argument. Not only is it not important, it is only trivially true in the following sense. So she has two groups of people, theists, atheists. On the one hand, this hand, oddly enough, you have theists, and then on the other hand, I have other fingers. On the other hand, you have people who are not theists. Okay, in other words, you have people who believe in a god, or she also factors in deism and pantheism, and I guess some other claims might qualify as well. But you have people who accept the propositions that these things exist as true, and then you have the universe of people who do not have a belief in the truth of those propositions. Well, okay, normally this wouldn't be a big problem, but once you bring babies in, you introduce a new trait, a new property that you are simply not taking sufficient stock of, BionicDance. And on your definition, by using babies, I would like to introduce you to some of my friends who are devout atheists. Come on, guys, come on. BionicDance, please meet Mr. Spoon and Madam Notebook. In the same sense that a baby does not believe in a god is the same sense that Madam Notebook and Mr. Spoon don't believe in God.
Okay, well, I played quite a bit of integral math there, and that's because there's quite a lot to go on. First, a point where I absolutely agree with him about, which is that if in some sense babies are atheists, then it's in the most trivial of senses. We learn very little from that. Theowarner made a really interesting point about this, which kind of tickled me when I heard it, which is that if something is the default position, what is actually so good about being a default position? Doesn't that mean that that's the position you arrive at without thinking about it? And is that the best position always the position you arrive at without giving it any thought? So there's nothing necessarily better about the default position, so it's not necessarily the best ground to claim in a philosophical sense. I can understand for political reasons why people would try and claim that ground, but let's try and suck the political positioning out of this and go a little bit further. What integral math went on to do was to then make this kind of jump. He didn't explicitly call Mr. Spoon and Madame Notebook as atheists, but this is kind of what's implied by this, that there's some similarity made between the baby and between the notebook, the spoon and the rock. And although he didn't make that connection, many people do and start labelling rocks as atheists. But if you go back a little bit earlier into that clip and look about when integral math was waving his hands in the air with the theists and the atheists, what was the word that was used? There was a very special word that was used, and it was people. He talked about people who were theists, and he talked about people who were atheists. Babies are people. So babies can fit into these categories. Rocks are not people, unless we're going to start classifying spoons and rocks and notebooks as people. There is your differentiator, and the point that I want to make is that this is a legitimate question. Are babies atheists? But the question, are rocks atheists, is a totally separate question, because it is implicit in the usage of the term atheist, as it is theist, as it is Jew, as it is non-Jew, that we are talking about people. We might not always spell it out. We might sometimes say, what's a Gentile? It's a non-Jew. What we mean is it's a non-Jewish person. An atheist may be something that lacks a belief in God, but what it is a person that lacks a belief in God. So I really think we need to do away, tell me if you think I'm wrong, with this idea that we need to dwell on whether rocks are atheists. Rocks are not atheists, because atheism is a term we apply to people. Rocks are not people. The question as to whether babies are classified as atheists, whether babies ought to be classified as atheists, is a separate question. For my money, and this is where my position's altered from 18 months ago, I say no. You're better to withhold that position until you get to a point where somebody's cognitive faculties are such that they would be able to entertain the notion if it was presented to them. I don't think you have to have knowledge of the idea of God, but you have to have the cognitive faculties of it. In just the same way with Gentiles, we could find a tribe of people in South America who'd never heard of Judaism, who'd never even come close to the idea. They would class as Gentiles, as non-Jews. The fact that they hadn't been presented with a thorough analysis of the beliefs of modern Judaism is irrelevant to their status as Gentiles. So it should be with atheism. You shouldn't have to have been presented with a concept, but you should surely have the cognitive faculties to be able to rationalise the problem were it presented to you. That's about all I've got to say on that. I think we should get past this idea of are rocks atheists? No, not unless we want to also consider the problem, are rocks people? Thanks for watching. Bye for now.